Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Canberra Business Chamber webinar on navigating export challenges and opportunities in the Pacific and Fiji. If you don't know me, my name's Greg Harford. I'm the Chief Executive of the Canberra Business Chamber, and I'm really pleased today that we're joined by three really interesting people. We've got Tim Houghton, who's the Australian Trade Commissioner for the Pacific and Timor-Leste. He's based in Suva and leading Austrade's efforts to enhance Australian business engagement in the region's infrastructure, food and beverage, and other emerging sectors. We've got David Ward from Gravity, who will be known to some of our members. He's the sales director at Gravity, who brings over a decade's worth of experience in sales and marketing within the craft beverage industry to help drive the company's growth and market presence, including internationally. And finally, Chris Dennis from TradeStart is joining us. Chris is a TradeStart advisor based out of New South Wales with Investment New South Wales, but he specialises in assisting small and medium-sized enterprises to expand their export activities and navigate international markets. Now, we're here today to talk specifically about Fiji and Pacific. This session is especially relevant for ACT exporters wanting to expand into some of those near neighbour markets in the Pacific. There's strong potential there, we understand, across sectors such as infrastructure, food and beverage, professional services, and more. So we're going to talk about some insights into the market, some real world experiences, and some practical advice on how to successfully engage with Pacific markets. So our format for today is we're going to hear from each of our speakers. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So to our audience, if you've got any questions, please just drop them into the Q&A function in the chat here at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Tim Houghton, the Trade Commissioner for Pacific and Timor. Tim, over to you.
Vanaka, and Bula Vanaka to all those joining. My name's Tim Houghton, as Greg mentioned. This is not necessarily just a fashion choice over in the Pacific. This is my everyday wear, which is pretty awesome, if you ask me. I was just saying to the speakers in the pre-meeting that on the first Saturday I moved to Suva, which was in 2023, I went shopping and bought 7 of these. So I've been rotating through them for a little while, and I've expanded my collection to be about just under 20 at this point. So I'll never have to go tropical shirt shopping again. So pleased to be here. Really excited to be able to talk through the opportunities in the region and specifically in Fiji. The brief I had was to talk a little bit about the economic opportunities in Fiji and the region, but to keep it pretty conversational. Keen to hear from you online. I'm happy to answer any questions. I guess living over here, you get to see the cut and thrust of doing business in Fiji, and there are a lot of nuances, so very happy to be responsive to any questions for those on the line. And it's a reasonably small cohort, so if you ask a question, you're probably going to get the answer. So it's a pretty good little format for us. I'll keep it pretty simple. There's 3 key economic opportunities that I see through my lens as the Trade Commissioner for the region, and for Fiji specifically. So the first of those is no surprise to anyone, I would imagine, which is the opportunity around tourism. So the tourism industry is about 40% of the GDP of Fiji. We experienced record numbers of inbound tourists in 2024. That was just under 1 million visitors. For context, the Fijian population is about 800,000. There are sort of like some interesting kind of high-level stats. Fiji has 4,000 hotel rooms. 14,000, and Bali has 140,000, which I think contextualizes the opportunity here. It's still niche. There's a lot of resorts, much to my chagrin. I don't mind a bit of adventure tourism, but hey, when in Rome, have a pina colada. So there is an effort to diversify that offering. So, you know, it's it's starting from a reasonably low base. Obviously, the resort offering is really advanced, but some of the adventure tourism stuff starting to take off. There's a lot of tourism activity in the Western corridor, so Nandi, essentially, Nandi Airport, and Denarau. There's a big amount of investment in the other island in Fiji. There's two big islands, and the northern island, Vanuatu, they're looking to invest in. They're looking to invest, obviously, across the Marmanuthas and Niusawas, the island chains, the beach kind of vibe that you all know of Fiji. So there's a little bit of effort around diversification, but the bottom line there is that there needs to be more hotel rooms. It's kind of full at the moment, and hotel room prices will reflect that. Dave will know that from coming up last year, that they're really, really expensive, and it hurts my weekend plans because going away is bloody expensive, and so you don't. But that's a good problem. There is obviously a lot of demand for staying in Fiji, which is great. The challenge, though, so you've got 14,000 room keys. There's probably an investment pipeline of about 20 to 30% increase in that stock. That will have significant implications on enabling infrastructure. So that's roads, energy, water, among others. And that's where I see a really, really big opportunity, and where I spend probably 80% of my time in this role is around enabling infrastructure. And that is Fiji, but it's the broader region as well. There was the first ever Vulvale business dialogue the week before last, and that's just a fancy name for saying the government of Fiji, the government of Australia, the Australia-Fiji Business Council, and the Fiji-Australia Business Council all got in together and had a chat, really. It's the first one of those that happened. And I can advocate for joining those business councils if you are interested in Fiji specifically. But that dialogue really flushed out, I suppose, enabling infrastructure is one of the key constraints for growth. There was someone in the freight space who was talking about the challenges around Suva Port and Lautoka Port. There was someone in the water industry who was talking about energy supply. There's obviously water processing here, bottling. There was a kava exporter who was mentioning that kava farmers have to walk 2 hours with their crop to reach the trucks to plug into the freight. And the health services here, like the Colonial War Memorial Hospital, which is the national hospital, have a long way to go. So that's sort of describing the problem. The solution is that there's quite a lot of money in infrastructure investment in the region, in the billions. And so for any kind of civil works contracts, consulting services, supply into any of that, there is a raft of opportunity. And that's where I spend a lot of my time, because it's not just we want to plug those gaps because it's an export opportunity. The Pacific Islands look to Australia and New Zealand to plug those gaps. So it's yes, the opportunity exists, but these countries actually look to us to be able to supply some of those more nuanced, goods or services. The other thing I'll mention on the Fiji economic opportunity is there's not just an effort to diversify the tourism industry, there's an effort to diversify the economy more broadly. And there's a couple of elements to that. So the biggest one that I experience in this role is the business process outsourcing sector, which is a fancy name for outsourcing call centres. Outside of tourism, that's where we're seeing the most growth in jobs, and particularly for Australian exporters. So KPMG Australia merged with KPMG Fiji, the partnerships merged, and that allowed KPMG to outsource some of its functions to Fiji. And they've got sort of 350 and shooting up to 500 jobs in that space. So ICT and the enablement around ICT is another opportunity. Google is brought in a second subsea cable here that builds in some redundancy, but they're also investing $200 million in a data center in Natandola. So, therein lies a whole sort of raft of opportunity for Fiji to lean into ICT. There's a 15,000 seat facility being built in Suva, and 15,000 seats is huge in anyone's books, but for Fiji that's going to be transformative in terms of the amount of call center jobs that will be enabled by that. So BPO and business process outsourcing is going to be a growth industry in Fiji, and there are going to be implications for all and sundry, really. Like, there's a whole lot of enabling services that you need to be able to get that off the ground, and they don't necessarily exist at this point. The second point around diversification would be agro-processing. So Austrade does a lot of work bringing in people like Dave. So Gravity Drinks is in Fiji. So there's Australian supply of food and beverage into particularly the hotels, but also retail. So the supermarkets here, both are viable opportunities, and we're excited to support that as part of our business at Austrade. We're very plugged into the distribution network here. There's probably only 10 distributors of significance, and we are, in with all of them. So we have good connections to support food and beverage into the region. There's also an effort to increase agro-processing though. So distributors here, because there's only 10 of them, there can be reasonably hefty margins slapped on top because there's not so many options. And so hotels are frustrated with that, and they are looking to go and grow their own veggies, that sort of thing. That's very nascent. I would say the distribution model is vastly dominant in terms of how most food and beverage comes into market. That's predominantly, it's very fertile here. You can grow lots of things. The challenge that the hotels have is consistency of supply. So, you want the same thing every week. And if you go locally, that's been the challenge that the hotels have had. And that's why they go to Australia and or New Zealand for their fresh produce and meats in particular. So that's me off the top, giving you my top three kind of areas. One's tourism, two is enabling infrastructure, and three is those kind of diversification options, which is BPO and agro-processing, or agri as a general kind of F&B into agri-processing. So I'll pause there, and I know this was meant to be a conversation, and I've just hogged the limelight. So I'll hand it back to Greg.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that. Before we sort of dive into hear David's practical experiences, I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions, if I may. And again, if we've got people online who have questions, just drop them into the Q&A and we'll get to those at an appropriate point. The big thing I wanted to ask was about business culture. Tim, you sort of mentioned that it's a bit different up there, but what are the differences apart from the dress code? What are the big differences between doing business in Canberra versus up there in Fiji?
Certainly in Fiji, it's a more relaxed business culture. I would say it can vary across the region. I would say, for example, Tonga is more formal than Fiji is. So, I'd caveat my response by saying each island is a bit different. Certainly in Fiji, talk about rugby, you're in pretty good stead. I'm from Melbourne, so that's probably more of a battle for me than it would be for all the Brumbies fans out there. But I think broadly speaking, it's a relaxed business culture. Relationships are essential. As I say, there's 10 distributors on the food and beverage side. So, those relationships are critical, which is obviously where the role of Austrade comes in handy to try and plug you into those distributors. I can go into sort of dress code and sort of I think just showing your face is probably the main thing. There's a lot of people who might see the Pacific as sort of next door, so it's kind of like you don't really need to bother. Like, it's just there. We'll focus on Asia, and then the Pacific's kind of the rest. Like, we'll just sort of rounding error, and that doesn't get you very far. FaceTime is what will make a difference. Multiple visits will do you well. Dave obviously nailed it on his first one, but if you want to succeed here long term, you need to show that level of investment. And the only way you get relationships here is showing up.
Okay, so that's some really good advice. My other question, just based on what you were talking about earlier, you were sort of suggesting that there's quite a lot of money in Fiji for infrastructure investment, or in the Pacific for infrastructure investment. Where's that coming from? Is that coming from the Australian government through AusAid, or is it coming from a broader range of sources?
Very glad you asked. This is my baby. So there's 1.9 billion US dollars in the infrastructure pipeline for the Pacific. That's only the projects that are agreed and funded. If you go into the conceptual stage, there's billions and billions. And the main constraint is capacity of the local trades and contractors, which often can be Australian firms coming in and working with local partners. The predominantly of that 1.9 billion, the three major development partners are the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the Australian government. That splits into DFAT and defence. So we work with them closely to try and take what can be very, like when I first joined, I would say my observation was I'd go to lots of seminars on infrastructure, and people would get up and say, hey, we've got $4 billion worth of stuff that we want to go and buy, right? We want to build a port, and we want to build a road, and we want to do this and this and that. And I go, well, like, what does that actually mean? Like, what contracts are you going to market with, and when? And that was much more difficult to get under the hood of. Austrade, over the last 18 months, has now got a spreadsheet with 566 rows in it. Each are a contract coming up in the region. And that is something that I'm sort of proud of and can actually give anybody who's interested. Further to that, we hosted a webinar in February, and again, I can share the recording link to this webinar. We hosted it. Alongside the ADB, the World Bank, DFAT, who else? The EU and New Zealand, and they all presented a very, quite a short, succinct pitch on what they're buying in the next 6 months and what they want Australian contractors and consultants to be aware of that's coming to market. The biggest problem in infrastructure out here is visibility. Like, there's 15 different Pacific Island countries. There's 6 different major development partners. How do you stay across it? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what that recording link will do for you. And the spreadsheet, you can filter it to make it relevant for your business. So yeah, certainly in the consulting space, I think there's 300 odd packages, contracts coming up. So lots to do.
Yep. Cool. Thank you. Well, look, really appreciate your insights there. And at this point, I'd like to welcome David Ward from Gravity into the mix. David is going to give us a bit of an overview of what Gravity is and what Gravity's been doing in Fiji. You can see we have got 1 or 2 questions coming in. We'll get to those at the end. But David, I'll hand over to you for now.
Amazing. Am I sharing screen?
You are. All is good.
Okay, cool. G'day, everyone. My name's David. I am the sales director of Gravity Drinks. We are primarily a better for you RTD company. And probably before I should start, I should say thank you to Tim for making our access into the Fiji market so seamless. So appreciate that, mate. And good to see you again. Gravity was founded in. I'm going to partially go through Canberra to our brand, sorry, to talk about what might be relevant in Australia is not relevant overseas, to just give a couple of specific examples in that. But Gravity was founded by a couple of Canberrans down in Mollymook on the south coast in summer of 2022. We're owned by, or partially owned by, a group of, I'd say, athlete ambassadors versus influencers. Some of these you may know, some of them you may not. I know this is a Canberra audience, so Jenna Louise and Harry Bink are pretty well-known ex-Canberrans. Harry Bink doing us proud on the world stage. And if you're an AFL player, and Tim, you sound like you are, Tim Boak is a Port Adelaide AFL player, going to play 400 games in the next few weeks. And they kind of, these athletes on the back end of their career kind of embody the Gravity message, which is all about being over sugar and ain't heavy. We're not about counting calories. It's more about, feeling light and the refreshment at the end of a day or a week, but also, being mindful that a lot of Australians and a lot of people around the world, not that many in Fiji, are considering, the amount of calories they're getting. This is specifically an example, and from an export perspective, I've been in some businesses that have done a fair bit of export, more than gravity. But you spend a lot of time, money, in defining who your customer is and where they are and what they do, and in our case, what they drink. And these are our two main customers here, and their purchasing driver. That's not necessarily the case where you export is going to be the same. And some of my advice is going to be, before you go, think around, what translates, what do you upweight, what do you downweight, as you go into the market. Here's the gravity range. So we've effectively got a range of seltzers, which are brewed using rice. So they're gluten-free, they're light, crisp, refreshing, delicious, but I wouldn't say flavor forward. Something that the Fiji market really wants. Strong flavor forward beverage. And then probably our big hitter, you may have seen this in some pubs around Canberra, the hard soda limoncello, which is a 5 times vodka distilled product. Both of these, how these are made is relevant specifically to Fiji because there's tax implications on a brewed beverage versus a distilled beverage. So I'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. Something that we talk about a fair bit is we actually plant trees via drone in Australia. This actually sparked up a lot of interesting conversations in Fiji. Obviously, climate change is on the tip of a lot of people's tongues over there, and talking about supporting reefs and things like that. So we got some conversations in the pipeline for the future, but sustainability. This is some relevant to some consumers, not many. Definitely a corporate relevance, but definitely important to us. Here is, I guess, a little bit of how we went about going into the market, and it was triggered for a couple of things. I guess gravity, we always saw ourselves as relevant in Asia and South Pacific. A lot of our athletes and ambassadors competed on like the World Surf Tour and things in Fiji, in the Fiji leg. So we always saw it as a natural process. We were mindful of it. We've got a lot of work to do to grow in Australia, and that's our primary goal. So when the opportunity with the ACT government trade investment came to go to Fiji, as a group, I knew how important that could be because, as Tim alluded to, there's only 10 distributors, but I think that was, from what I could tell, one of the first times they've all been in a room together. And it made some of I guess the networking components of it fairly easy. But I also knew that we had a fair bit of work to do to get to the point where we're ready to do a deal when we're in the market. And I guess just maybe taking you guys through the steps of what we did was market research, knowing what our brand and product strengths were, weaknesses, suitability for the market, being very open. The seltzer flavor wasn't exactly what they were looking for in terms of they preferred a lot more flavor forward. I know diabetes is a big thing in Fiji, but they weren't too worried about sugar. So there's a lot of things that we spent a lot of time talking about that wasn't as relevant, whereas the limoncello was right on point. Probably the biggest thing I recommend for anyone exporting is understanding your value chain before you go. Here's an example of just a part of a spreadsheet that we use. So be able to know that when we go into the market, what a can is likely to be when it's on a shelf in a resort, in a nightclub, in a local venue. That's very important, and price is very competitive. There's a lot of, you know, we're effectively an unknown brand there, but there's a lot of brands from New Zealand, or the larger macro products that, are getting stuff there significantly cheaper than us. So it's really, really good to understand your costs. Obviously support, so leveraging people like Austrade and in the ACT, the Office of International Engagement, which have been really good, and obviously kind of started this conversation here today in the business chamber, and that's ongoing conversations. Example, we reached out to Tim a few months ago about making an introduction to Canada for us. So I would really recommend you kind of know what resources are there to help you assist you get in market, because ultimately that's the goal. Networking, don't wait before you go over there to make introductions. Absolutely reach out to people. That's something that we did pretty successfully. All of those 10 importers knew who we were before we went in and sat down with them. And a couple of them followed up on us because there'd been that early introduction, whereas a lot of other people on that trip were basically just rocking up, shaking hands, talking about the product for the first time, and no one had seen it. Probably speed is probably the most important thing. So I think I flew back and we had a container getting packed up to leave back to Fiji within 10 days. And that we're able to do that because we had our supply chain set up. We knew exactly what the price needed to be or was going to be. And we're ready. So you need to be ready to do deals, which I think is, to Tim's point, like no one had responded to my emails, but when we were there in the market, oh yeah, we saw that email. Showing face was definitely important. And then, the final thing is just a classic sales. Like you probably isn't really product really isn't working unless you've got your second order. So make sure that you don't just send a container and say, see you in 6 months. You've got to make sure you keep up all those classic sales pieces. Just down here is just an example of, looking at the group that are on this call. It's probably not relevant to most of you. I didn't see any other beverage suppliers, but here's just some of the tax differences for Fiji for different alcoholic beverages, which is important. Here's an example of our supply chain. So, a big part of the ACT government, I think, getting us over there was the expectation that we would fly product to Fiji on the airlines, which a box of RTDs is pretty heavy, so it's not really that's not a good option for us. We have an export partner that anyone in the beverage space could use. There's plenty of businesses do this. We produce our product in Victoria. This partner buys our stock for us. For us, it's excise implications, so they buy with excise CDS, which is the container deposit scheme. Um, they then manage the terms with the distributor that we have. They offer those terms to them. Then they ship the products. We've shipped one full container, a couple of half containers, and then again, super relevant to us, um, is they claim back the excise and CDS, which easy, pretty well a seamless process from us, from our perspective. Us knowing that we know what our net price needs to be, net all of those, and having been burnt a couple of times in the export game over the time, there's next to no credit risk with in this case, ASX listed company, being the person that kind of holds the risk. But you know, to Tim's point, there's 10 distributors in the market. We didn't crack the top three, but our distributors probably a top five, I would say. They distribute, a lot of what they do. They service, whether it's bed sheets, coffee, food, into the resorts. So, for what we're talking about, $50,000 worth of stock for a container, that's not a big expense for them. So I think if you've got one of those serious distributors, credit risk is probably low. Um, but something that I'm always super mindful of. There's a couple of things that and sorry I'm speeding through this, but a couple of things that I kind of learnt from this trip, and subsequently is first being ready to kind of go fast and slow. Fiji time is probably real in some regards, but they also quick to move. They're experienced business people. They know what they need to do with shipping costs. There was a small freight discrepancy at one point from a shipment internally in Australia that we had, and that wasn't missed. So make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. Specifically for us, it's quite a segmented market between kind of the local market and the resort market. The expectations are different. What drives consumer behavior is definitely different. Um, and you kind of might need a strategy for all three. Our distributor, for example, owns some bottle shops in Denarau Island, which is pretty handy for us, as a way to kind of have a home base for sales. And we're probably not doing a great job making our way into the kind of the local market. So, like anything, it's always a bit of a work on. Um, it's the same stuff you're doing here, but it's further away. You won't have the same visibility. It's not easy. Sometimes I think, Australia is one of the highest margin alcohol markets in the world. And we've got plenty of work to do to grow our business here. But there's definitely opportunities, and we're kind of experiencing it this year. But just something to be mindful of, that it's never going to be easy to manage. Specifically for us, our partner has sales teams. They change. They're not necessarily always really well remunerated. They've got other priorities. So, the classic staff education, training for your products, incentives. Again, it's just that classic, don't put something on the shelf and expect it to work. You really do have to lean into it. Um, I'd probably also say something that kind of shocked me is, and I just an example of a text message on the screen there, the amount of people that actually go to Fiji on holidays. This guy owns one of the best pubs in Newcastle, and he's like, "Oh, mate, I saw your product," and I would say you kind of want to leverage the proximity and travel between markets. We do that with our ambassadors. If they're going on holidays or whatever, just even from a content perspective. And then maybe just the final point for me before we go to questions is um, build relationships in the market. On that trip, we built a small relationship with the CEO of Tourism Fiji. And off the back of that, over summer, we ran a national competition through Coles Liquor in Australia, where it was by gravity, win a trip to Fiji. It's in collaboration with Coles and Fiji Tourism. They collaborated on the prize. The benefit for them is they're advertising some pretty big media opportunities. They're advertising Fiji to an Australian market. And for us, we're sending hopefully thousands of people bought more people bought Gravity than we're going to. And it was just for us, a really neat way to um, neat as in tidy way to kind of roll up our summer promotions across both countries, and create a bit of a correlation there, I guess. And reasonably worked well, and we hope to be able to do that with this conversations that are potentially big content pieces as part of their advertising campaigns featuring our athletes. So there's, yeah, I guess more to come in that space, but that's probably me. Before we go over to questions, there's my details if anyone has a pub or a bottle shop in Canberra. But if or or a consulate that wants to arrange it, I saw the Mexican consulate there, I think. Please have any questions. We're very small in the scheme of things, I guess, um, for beverage in the Fiji market, but small and growing. And for us, it's exciting, and we have big hopes for it to get bigger and better.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David, for that. Some really interesting advice there. And I'm really interested in the promotion that you ran, because that was a good sort of two-way win, presumably both for Fiji, but also for you. I'm sorry I missed that. So perhaps let us know next time you're running a trip to Fiji promotion. I'll be in.
Will do.
Absolutely. Look, we do have a couple of questions coming in, but we'll go to Chris first, and then sort of come back and deal with questions that we have. So, Chris is the Trade Start Advisor, or a Trade Start Advisor for Investment New South Wales. He's going to give us a bit of a chat about first time exporting to the Pacific. So, Chris, I'll hand over to you, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Greg. Can you see my screen? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim and David, both very enlightening. And for people watching, we haven't colluded. There's going to be a lot of reinforcement and support of what David and Tim have just said. So, as Greg said, I'm a Trade Start Advisor based in Orange. For a business starting the export journey, it can be both exciting and a little bit daunting. So the Trade Start network is set up to help you through that journey. So we're a network of 70, 80 across the country. And why is New South Wales Trade Start Advisor talking to you today? Well, ACT is actually currently recruiting to fill the role there. But we're a network across Australia that work very closely together. We get together regularly, and we are the link to the global Austrade network in many ways for businesses. So many of our daily activities are one-on-one services with businesses to assist with specific market inquiries. Many of the issues that Tim and David have mentioned there, we help businesses navigate through that process. And where we don't know the answer to the question, we get in touch with offshore resources such as Tim to help us out with the right information. So we provide that linkages and introductions, both getting to port locally, but also the introductions in market as far as distributors and importers. And we help small to medium businesses navigate that map to and pathway to export readiness. So that can be through developing an export plan or just having a conversation with businesses about flagging the constraints that might be locally or within their business that might come up when taking an advantage of an export opportunity. Are you prepared? Have you thought about this? Many of the things that David and Tim have mentioned, we try and have those conversations before the opportunity lands in your lap that you've discussed this and mitigated some risks or got prepared. Some of the group activities that as a Trade Start Advisor, what we do is we lead group workshops and lead delegations offshore to trade shows and activities. We host inbound delegations. We're working with Meat and Livestock Australia for a delegation that's visiting next week. We support industry groups who have members who are wanting to prepare to be exporters, and we collaborate across all levels of government, such as we are today. So exporting to Fiji, both my own experience and the experience through the clients and through my clients who are exporting to Fiji, some of the opportunities, why it is such a good opportunity, as Tim mentioned, it is the proximity and ease of service. To be able to go out there and a very short flight, the time difference is no challenge. It's such an easy service market to service, but don't take that to be complacent though. You still need to go out there and do it, but in relative terms to other export markets, it's one of the easier ones to service. And as mentioned, the tourism and the hospitality sector is a really strong sector. It is actually one of the highest yielding hospitality sectors in the world. And 40% of the GDP, it's the main gig in town, but not the only, but it's one to concentrate on. Servicing those, there are existing trade logistics networks, which David and Tim have mentioned. So they're already set up. But so it's getting the in with those that they're established, but it's getting familiar with those is where you should maximise that opportunity. And for those reasons above, it's a great export market to cut your teeth on before you develop onto other export markets. Really develop the Fiji market, get to know it, and you'll get a lot of learnings out of developing such a great market that's nearby. Exporting in general is a great risk management tool. Through diversifying your markets, developing an export market, if there is a downturn domestically, you still have an export market or developing export markets to fall back on. So it's a good risk management strategy. And as you're competing with New Zealand, other states, other countries, everyone wanting to service Fiji, you will innovate and you'll foster continuous improvement within your business by exporting. The risks, as with any export market and any market at all, really, is there'll be some regulatory compliance. Biosecurity and permits will probably be needed for rag and food products. IP protection, whether it's domestic or international, you should really consider how you're protecting your brand. Finding freight and logistics and distribution partners, as David has done a lot of work in that, as we can see from his last presentation, and that is critical to make sure that your product is turning up on the shelf in the best possible condition. Cultural differences may or may not be some, but you need to get to know them, what they are. Export pricing, again, sometimes just sending small batch samples over there will have pricing implications, but As Trade Start advisors, we help you through that process. We have resources to help with that, but really getting to know what it's going to be on the shelf at the other end, it's very important that your pricing reflects that, but you are taking into account those other regulatory and compliance costs. Managing payments. Exporting can often usually does have a longer lead time, so you need to manage that risk, but also lack of preparedness and capacity to be responsive, because sometimes these opportunities might not be shopped around just to yourself, that they might go to other people as well. So being responsive and prepared and have your pitch and have your pricing ready is very important. So managing those risks, how do you do that is basically doing your homework. As David obviously did, as far as really getting to know the market, getting to know the product in the market, the variety, the packaging size, the very specifics of each product is critical. You do that by going there yourself or talking to your importer and distributor. Trademark registrations, there are specialised lawyers and consultants out there that we can direct you to look after that. Finding freight and the logistics at both ends, getting it to port, whether it's whichever port it is, and at the port at the other end, that's a critical piece of your supply chain that you've got to get to know and master. But as Tim and David have both said, going to market and learning how business is conducted, both for cultural norms and those above mentioned points, is important, but not be a one-hit wonder as well. Develop a relationship by turning up, being boots on the ground. Managing the risk, also working out your export pricing and margins, as I mentioned. We have a spreadsheet that helps do that, and all Trade Start advisors would. As learning your Incoterms, where your importer takes delivery is very critical as far as you're managing your own risk, but where you set your pricing as well. Export Financing Corporation is a resource that should be worth considering as well if you haven't discussed that with your commercial provider, finance provider already. As mentioned, having your capability statement or pitch deck, have that ready and rehearsed and polished. As David indicated, he's done that many times, but for an emerging exporter, you need to have your elevator pitch rolling off the tongue naturally when you have your first opportunity to make your first impression. So the resources, the 4 websites along the right-hand side there are great to start with. The Going Global Toolkit, particularly topical at the moment because of it being updated daily with tariff information. IP Australia is a great site to get to know and work your way around. Export Finance Corporation, as I've mentioned, it's a federal government authority specifically set up to finance exporters. And the Austrade Network, there's more information there at that site. And as one of our services are to help you with export pricing, explanation of Incoterms, export planning templates. And all of the Trade Start advisors have also had private sector experience in exporting. So we have some scars on our back, some experience, which we can help you navigate your initial and ongoing export experiences. Again, we did not collude at all, but sort of my research and experience in the market. What are the opportunities specifically to Fiji? The food and beverage sector is a strong one due to those that strong hospitality sector. Health and building materials and infrastructure, as Tim mentioned, the enabling infrastructure. There's quite a big pipeline of work there. Training and education. Potentially as well, and clean and off-grid energy as the tourism market diversifies, they'll be looking for some solutions with that. So just my final point is to remember to utilise the Trade Start network and to use the offshore resources such as Tim and the DFAT resources, but Austrade networks offshore, whether it's Fiji or any market you're visiting. They'd love to hear that you're coming and love to help you. The online resources on the previous slide, but most of all, plan, research, and visit the market and visit it again and again, because exporting is a long-term commitment. It's about developing relationships. Again, that's my contact details there, and more than happy to field any questions. And back to you, Greg.
Thank you very much. Look, a couple of questions about food manufacturing. So we might sort of start there. And Tim, we might sort of turn to you as the sort of person on the ground up there. What's the food manufacturing market like in Fiji? Is there a lot of commercial food manufacturing?
Yep. So there's a bit. So look up Punjas, Punjas, and Flour Mills of Fiji, or FMF. Interesting family history there. One brother owns each of those two organisations. They make biscuits, like a range of things. So there is some food manufacturing here. They're the two biggest players. There's a little bit of beverage as well. So Fiji Gold, which is kind of like 4X, and Fiji Bitter, which is kind of like Vic Bitter, kicking around. So there's a bit outside of Fiji, at least in the South Pacific region. There's less. I think Fiji is the most mature by some distance.
Do you think there's an appetite for healthy, natural, high nutrition products? Our questioner apparently makes white lupin products, so products made from lupin flour, crumbs, flakes for retail and wholesale.
I think there's a couple of ways that I could take that. So I reckon on the tourism side, yes. I would say, I work very closely with the distributors, of which there's not that many, so I need to keep them on side. But I would say there's not a whole heap of innovation on the food and beverage side in Fiji, and that distribution model doesn't necessarily help that. But it's interesting because the hotel room rates have gone up to such degree where the expectation of guests has changed. No longer do they sort of accept a burger and chips or fish and chips, like the menus have to get more sophisticated, and there is an appetite where there may not have been previously. So that's on the hotel side. On the retail side, you can segment things between, obviously your higher disposable income and the majority of the population, but we're starting from a base of 800,000 people that live in Fiji, so it's not a large population base to start with. Certainly, the expat population in Suva's boomed with the geostrategic environment. Whether it's the Australian government, the Americans have thrown in 40 people. I suppose we'll monitor how that sort of progresses, but they've thrown in 40 Americans. The Australians have gone from 30 Australians to over 60. But I suppose like the numbers that we're talking about are still quite small. It's just that there's not a lot for those people. So like you speak to the Deputy High Commissioner here and she's like, I'll pay anything for cheese. Like good cheese, I'll pay like $100. Just lay it on me. So it is a supply and demand thing. We might be talking about smaller numbers, but there is a demand among those small numbers. Among the broader population, the VAT went up last year, so cost of living is a big problem, and there's not a whole lot of appetite or scope really to spend.
Yeah. And I guess the good news is we've got those direct flights from Canberra. So if we do have people wanting to export some of those high value and more perishable products like cheese, there are ways to get them there in small quantities relatively quickly. Our final question, really, I think for both Tim and Chris was, are you in a position to make introductions to the distributors?
Yeah. Yep. I suppose we'd have a intro call. I've got a business development manager in the team here in Suva, who can have a conversation, do a little bit of a kind of sense check about product market fit. Obviously, we don't want to make introductions if they're not going to go anywhere, and we can give you a bit of a steer on your product mix and how that might sit in the Fiji market. And then, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's our role is to make export to the Pacific and to Fiji more easy. So, very happy to help.
Fantastic. David, I might just sort of jump back to you, and given that you've been practically exporting some stuff up there more recently, when you went into it, were there things that differed to your expectations? Is there a myth about exporting to the Pacific that you'd like to sort of bust for us?
I mean, genuinely, I was shocked how quickly we were able to get something done. That was probably the biggest surprise. Everyone was, you'd struggle to turn around a bottle shop in Ainsley with in that short timeline. So I would say that a lot of these people, they're experienced buyers. And if the stars align and you have what they're looking for, like make sure you're ready to go quickly. Because I think I don't. There was a couple of other people that did well on that trip, but I think we were one of the few. And I think a lot of people were they weren't ready when they weren't there. It's probably the biggest thing I would make out.
Yeah, so
Just to jump in, the distributors are very centralized decision makers. So it'll be the person who runs the show will go to the lunch and then they'll make a decision on the spot. It's not like there's a huge bureaucratic kind of process. So yeah, I mean, if it hits right, it'll happen. But it can be very much hurry up and wait because it might not be the right fit at the right time. But then if the planets align, and then all of a sudden it'll pop up out of nowhere and it'll be due yesterday.
Yeah, it's probably also like how like they're all very aware and sophisticated like around the Australian market as well. So you're not going to get a like don't be honest about your market position and stuff. For example, our importer slash distributor, they spend a lot of their time in Australia. They live in Australia as well. Definitely like I would say for any kind of sales process, be as genuine as you possibly can be.
yeah. Chris, have you got anything to add to that?
No, they're all good points. Just a recent conversation with a client last week who exports seeds to Fiji was that uh, the systems they're dealing with at the other end, it seemed quite analog. Like the requirements can often change from shipment to shipment. So it's be attentive to the detail and be flexible and prepared to adapt to make sure the paperwork's spot on and is full. Um, it complies with the requirements at the time, but that can change. But I think, yeah, but it's also about relationships. I've got a wine producer who's uh, um, developed the market there through contacts already had. So it's about developing those relationships and being in there, being in market and talking to people very regularly and training the people, the retail staff, when and where you can, getting
Mm.
the knowledge up in market. Thanks, Greg.
How often do you think you need to be in market to build those relationships?
Well, I don't think you want to. Depends how many export markets you've got, but I think I don't know if there's a magic formula, but you need to be present and if things are going well, don't take the foot off the pedal necessarily, but keep if you're doing something right, keep doing it. And if things aren't evolving, maybe you've got to change something. But I don't know if that's answered your question, but it might be every 6 months, might be every 3 months. So David might have a better understanding of that than me.
Yeah, I would say no right answer. A lot of it's going to be dictated and, need to be dictated or there needs to be some nexus with revenue and expenditure because they're not cheap flights. I would say I would just kind of apply what we would apply in Australia. Like, think about your quarterly reviews. They don't need to be in person. And if you could get away an annual trip, probably would be a good benchmark. is what I would say. But if we were doing $50 million in revenue, I'd probably be there every month. So it's just like,
Yeah, obviously it scales, right? Depending
yeah, yeah. So
on business.
And it depends on the sector. So there's different events for different types of firms. Given the F&B focus, the biggest show in town is run every 2 years, which is Hotech. The ACT government was part of that last year, and Austrade was the platinum sponsor for that, along with TIQ. So that's sort of that's the big dance. So in the F&B space, you do that, but that's not enough, right? Like every 2 years feels a bit thin. So then you might plug in something else. On the infrastructure side, we're kind of doing a lot of leadership in that space. There's a conference with all 15 Pacific Island countries coming to one spot, which is very rare given, we're talking about logistics quite a lot. Having like the Marshall Islands, along with Tonga, along with Solomon Islands, along with whoever else, all in Brisbane, actually, is where it is. So that's on the 18th to the 20th of August, and that's a bit of a showstopper. So if you're in that space or interested in that space, that's the one to come along. Again, there's sort of one every year. It might look a bit different every year, but there's something like that every year. So it does depend, but there's just a couple of things, a couple of landmarks to keep an eye out for, depending on the sector that you're in.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. Now, look, we're nearly out of time, but I guess just to close this off, I've got a last question for all of you. If you had one golden rule about exporting to the Pacific, what would it be, Tim?
Show up, partnerships. I think that's the key. If you want to really succeed, then that's a fundamental.
David?
I would just say have a goal. Don't go for a holiday. Have a goal and try and get something done.
Chris, anything to add there?
Yeah, both of those 2 points are great. Better keep on working on making sure your product's turning up at the other end the way you want it, the way it should be. I think, but Tim and David's points are spot on.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's been really interesting to hear a bit more about the Fiji market and the Pacific market more broadly. We will have a recording of this available for interested people, and it'll be on our website along with a number of other resources. Excuse me, that we have, including webinars we've done in the past on export finance and indeed navigating the Austrade Go Global Toolkit. So there are some good resources there at canberrabusiness.com. This webinar has been produced by the Canberra Business Chamber with the support of the ACT government. So thank you to them for that. And with that, we'll say au revoir. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been really insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Good to see you as well, Tim.